Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I work remotely as a landscape designer, so when I finally saved enough to buy my first house 6 months ago, I was incredibly picky about finding the perfect property. After months of searching, I found it. A charming corner lot in an established neighborhood with the most beautiful feature I could have asked for. The house came with this gorgeous expanse of lawn that wrapped around the side, completely unfenced and begging for a creative touch. I had grand plans for that space: native plants, stone pathways, maybe even a small seating area where I could take my morning coffee. The property lines weren't obvious to casual observers, just some old survey pegs from decades ago that were barely visible in the grass. According to my realtor, the previous owners had been elderly and hadn't done much with the yard, so some neighbors had gotten into the habit of using parts of it as overflow parking or a shortcut. I figured that would stop once I moved in and started making improvements. I was wrong. The first incident happened about a week after I moved in. I was standing at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, admiring my future garden space and mentally planning where to place different plants. That peaceful moment got shattered when this massive SUV came rumbling around the corner and drove straight onto the middle of my pristine lawn. The driver got out without even looking back at the tire tracks she'd left and walked into a house a few doors down. I stood there staring at the deep ruts in my beautiful grass, thinking surely this had to be a mistake. Maybe she was in a hurry or had some kind of emergency. But when I went outside to check the damage, I found a growing oil stain right where her engine had been sitting. This wasn't just careless parking, this was going to kill my grass. Over the next week, it became clear this wasn't a one-time thing. Every single day, this woman would pull her hulking SUV right onto my lawn like it was her personal parking spot. The tire tracks got deeper, the oil stain got bigger, and my beautiful grass started dying. I learned from a neighbor that her name was Patricia, though everyone called her by a nickname that rhymed with Karen. She'd lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years and apparently considered herself the unofficial mayor of the block. After watching this happen for a full week, I decided to handle things the mature way. I waited until I saw her come outside and approached her with what I hoped was a friendly smile. I introduced myself as the new neighbor and politely explained that she was parking on my property. Her reaction was immediate and dismissive. She looked me up and down like I was some kind of pest and told me I must be confused about how things worked around here. According to her, that spot had been overflow parking for decades and it wasn't hurting anything since it was just grass. She actually patted me on the shoulder in this condescending way and said I'd understand better once I'd been in the neighborhood longer. I tried to explain that I had plans for a garden and that her car was damaging the lawn, but she just laughed and walked away while I was still talking. She told me over her shoulder that I shouldn't try to change things that had been working fine for years. After that conversation, I was frustrated, but still wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she just needed time to adjust to having a new neighbor. So I decided to try a different approach. The next time she parked on my lawn, I left a polite but clear note on her windshield. I made sure to laminate it so it wouldn't get damaged by weather, and I wrote in friendly terms that this was private property and asked her to please park elsewhere since her vehicle was causing damage. When she found the note, she read it right there in front of me while I was working in my front yard. She made a big show of crumpling it up and tossing it onto my lawn before getting in her car and driving off. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened the next day. She came back and parked even more aggressively than before. Instead of just pulling onto the grass, she drove back and forth a few times, deliberately deepening the ruts. It was like she was sending me a message that my note had made zero difference. Things escalated the following weekend when she decided to host some kind of party. I watched from my window as she directed not just her own car, but 4 or 5 of her guests' vehicles to park all over my lawn. By the time the party was over, my beautiful grass looked like a muddy parking lot. There were tire tracks everywhere, more oil stains, and even some trash that had been dropped and not picked up. That was my breaking point. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The officer who came out was sympathetic and understood my frustration, but he explained that since it was private property without clear boundaries or signage, it was considered a civil matter. He couldn't ticket or tow the vehicles. However, he gave me some advice that turned out to be crucial later. He told me that if I wanted to have vehicles towed in the future, I'd need to have clear signage and visible boundaries on my property. He also suggested getting a formal property survey to make sure I knew exactly where my lines were. At the time, I felt defeated hearing that the police couldn't help, but his advice was about to become very important. While the officer was explaining all this to me, Patricia was watching from her front porch with this smug grin on her face. As soon as he left, she made sure to call out loudly to one of her guests that some people needed to learn how things worked in established neighborhoods. It was clear she thought she'd won and that I couldn't do anything about her parking. That public humiliation was exactly the motivation I needed to come up with a better plan. I spent the rest of that weekend researching property law and thinking about what the officer had said. The key phrase that kept echoing in my head was, "It's private property." I started forming an idea that would solve my problem without requiring an expensive fence that would ruin my open garden concept. First, I hired a professional surveyor. They came out the following week and placed bright new stakes at the exact corners of my property, confirming officially that the entire grassy area was indeed mine. This gave me the legal foundation I needed for everything that came next. Next, I went to a landscape supply company and ordered several large boulders. These weren't just any rocks. I chose beautiful natural stones that were about 2 to 3 feet high and positioned them strategically right where Patricia's SUV tires usually sat. Suddenly, it became physically impossible to park in that spot, but I wasn't done yet. Around the boulders, I planted a border of the most unpleasant bushes I could find at the nursery. The staff recommended something called barberry bushes, which look absolutely beautiful when they bloom but have these incredibly sharp thorns that make them painful to brush against. I made sure to plant them thick enough that nobody would want to walk through them. The final touch was my favorite part of the whole plan. I installed what I called a state-of-the-art irrigation system, which was really just a series of motion-activated sprinklers. I positioned the sensors to cover the exact area where Patricia used to park, and I put up a professional-looking sign that read, "Proud owner's new garden. Please admire from a distance. Automated sprinkler system active to ensure proper growth. Thank you." The whole project took about 2 weeks to complete, and I have to admit I was pretty proud of how it turned out. The boulders and bushes looked beautiful and gave the area a natural landscaped appearance that definitely improved the neighborhood's aesthetic. I didn't have to wait long to see Patricia's reaction. She came home from work on a Tuesday evening and drove toward her usual spot without really paying attention. When she saw the boulders and thorny bushes where she normally parked, she slammed on her brakes so hard I could hear her tires screech from inside my house. I peeked out the window and watched her face go through about 5 different expressions before settling on pure rage. She got out of her car and stood there for a moment, clearly trying to process what had happened to her parking spot. Then she started marching toward my front door, and I knew exactly what was about to happen. As soon as she stepped onto my property line, the motion sensors triggered and the sprinklers activated. She got absolutely drenched from head to toe in about 2 seconds. The look of shock and outrage on her face was honestly one of the most satisfying things I've ever witnessed. She came pounding on my door, dripping wet and furious. When I answered, she immediately started screaming about how I'd done this on purpose to harass her and that she was going to report me to everyone she could think of. I kept my voice calm and told her I had no idea what she meant. I explained that I was just following my long-term landscaping plans for my private property, and that the survey had confirmed where my property lines were. As for the water, I pointed out that my sign clearly warned about the automated sprinkler system and suggested she should be more careful about where she walked. She threatened to complain to the city, the homeowners association, and anyone else who would listen, but I wasn't worried. I had the survey documents, proper permits for all my landscaping, and everything I'd done actually improved the appearance of the neighborhood. Sure enough, when she tried to file complaints, they went nowhere. The city confirmed that all my landscaping was legal and properly permitted. The homeowners association actually sent me a nice note complimenting my beautification efforts and asking if I'd be willing to share my landscaping plans with other neighbors who wanted to improve their properties. Patricia was completely defeated, and the best part was that my solution was permanent. She couldn't argue with boulders, and she definitely couldn't move them without heavy equipment. She had no choice but to find somewhere else to park. Over the next few weeks, I watched my garden start to flourish. The boulders became a beautiful focal point, the thorny bushes filled in nicely and even started blooming, and the sprinkler system kept everything properly watered. I added some native plants around the edges and created the stone pathway I'd originally envisioned. It looked better than I'd ever imagined it could. The final satisfying moment came about a month later. I was having my morning coffee and looking out at my beautiful garden when I saw Patricia trudging down the street in the rain. She was carrying groceries and clearly had to park much farther away now that she couldn't use my lawn. When she passed my house, she shot this hateful glare at my thriving, car-free garden, but there was nothing she could do about it. I learned that some people have to learn the hard way that wanting something doesn't give you the right to take it. My property was finally mine again, and my garden had never looked better. In a way, Patricia's entitlement had actually helped me create something beautiful where before there had just been empty grass. The story could have ended there, But Patricia wasn't quite ready to give up entirely. A few weeks after the sprinkler incident, I noticed she was driving by my house much more frequently than necessary, often slowing down to stare at my garden. At first I thought she was just being nosy, but then things got weird. I started finding small pieces of trash scattered around my garden area. Nothing major, just enough to be annoying and make me wonder if it was intentional. Then, one morning, I discovered that someone had tried to dig up one of my newly planted bushes. It wasn't successful, thankfully, since barberry bushes have extensive root systems, but it was clear someone had been messing with my landscaping. I decided it was time to upgrade my security. I installed a few discreet cameras around the garden area, partly to protect my investment and partly because I had a suspicion about who might be behind the mysterious damage. My suspicions were confirmed the following week when my cameras caught Patricia sneaking into my yard at around midnight. The motion sensors triggered the sprinklers immediately, soaking her before she could do whatever damage she'd planned. The footage showed her scrambling to get away while cursing loudly enough that I'm sure she woke up half the neighborhood. The next morning, I made copies of the video and took them to the police station. The officer I spoke with was the same one who'd come out for the original parking complaint, and he remembered the situation. He told me that what Patricia was doing now constituted trespassing and vandalism, and that I could press charges if I wanted to. I decided to take a different approach first. I burned the video onto a DVD and hand-delivered it to Patricia's front door with a note explaining that I had clear evidence of her trespassing and attempted vandalism. I mentioned that while I hadn't contacted the police yet, I would be happy to do so if there were any future incidents. That was the end of Patricia's midnight garden attacks. She apparently decided that risking criminal charges wasn't worth whatever petty revenge she'd been planning. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself and the importance of knowing your rights as a property owner. I'd started out just wanting to protect my lawn and create a nice garden, but I ended up learning valuable lessons about dealing with entitled people and the satisfaction that comes from solving problems creatively rather than just getting angry. 6 months later, my garden is absolutely thriving. The native plants have filled in beautifully, the stone pathway gets compliments from neighbors who walk by, and the boulders have developed this lovely weathered look that makes them seem like they've always been there. Even the barberry bushes have become a conversation starter. Their thorns keep unwanted visitors away, but they produce these gorgeous red berries that birds love. I've had several neighbors ask for advice on their own landscaping projects, and I've become something of the unofficial neighborhood gardening expert. It's funny how things work out sometimes. What started as a frustrating problem with an entitled neighbor ended up leading to a beautiful garden and new friendships with people who actually respect property boundaries. Patricia still lives a few houses down, but we maintain a polite distance. She parks legally on the street now and hasn't caused any more problems. Sometimes I see her looking at my garden when she walks by, but I think she's finally accepted that her days of using my lawn as a parking lot are over for good. Looking back, I'm actually grateful for the whole experience. It forced me to be more assertive than I naturally am, and it resulted in something beautiful that I get to enjoy every day. Every morning when I sit with my coffee and look out at my thriving garden, I'm reminded that sometimes standing up for yourself leads to outcomes that are better than anything you originally planned. My advice to anyone dealing with similar situations would be to know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to get creative with your solutions. Sometimes the best revenge is simply making your own life better while making it impossible for others to take advantage of you. The motion-activated sprinklers are still active, by the way. They're great for keeping the plants watered, and they serve as an excellent deterrent for anyone who might think about taking shortcuts through my garden. I like to think of them as my little insurance policy against future entitlement. Update. I thought the story was pretty much over, but a few things happened recently that I figured were worth sharing since so many people seemed interested in how everything turned out. First, the good news. My garden has become something of a neighborhood attraction. The local gardening club actually featured it in their newsletter, and I've had 3 different neighbors ask me to help them design landscaping for their own properties. I started charging a small consulting fee, which has turned into a nice little side business. It's funny how Patricia's entitlement ended up helping me discover a new income stream. But here's where it gets really interesting. About 2 months ago, Patricia put her house up for sale. I first noticed the realtor signs going up and figured she'd finally had enough of living near my offensive garden. I didn't think much of it until I overheard a conversation between her and her real estate agent while I was working in my front yard. The agent was asking about the neighborhood and any potential issues buyers should know about. Patricia immediately launched into this rant about how the neighbor had destroyed the parking situation and created hostile conditions for longtime residents. She actually told the agent that my garden was a deliberate act of aggression designed to lower her property values. The agent asked to see what she was talking about, so they walked over toward my property line. I could hear the whole conversation from where I was kneeling behind some bushes, pulling weeds. The agent took one look at my beautiful, professionally landscaped garden and said something like, "This is gorgeous! This would definitely be a selling point for the neighborhood. Your buyers will love having such nice landscaping next door." Patricia's response was to insist that it used to be parking and that I'd stolen community space. The agent politely but firmly explained that private property owners had every right to landscape their own land however they wanted, and that beautiful gardens typically increased property values for everyone. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing when Patricia started arguing with her own realtor about whether nice landscaping was good or bad for the neighborhood. The house went on the market about a week later, and that's when things got really petty. Patricia apparently decided that if she couldn't use my lawn for parking, she was going to make sure potential buyers knew about her version of the parking situation. I started noticing that whenever people came to look at her house, she would walk them right up to my property line and point out all the ways my garden was supposedly problematic. She told one couple that the boulders were a safety hazard for children. She told another family that the thorny bushes were an aggressive act designed to hurt people. My personal favorite was when she informed a young couple that the sprinkler system was actually a trap I'd set up to attack innocent pedestrians. What she didn't realize was that several of these potential buyers actually knocked on my door afterward to compliment my landscaping and ask questions about the neighborhood. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to help them with their own gardens if they bought Patricia's house. Apparently, having a landscape designer living next door was seen as a major bonus, not a problem. One family was particularly interested in my story. They told me that Patricia had gone on this long rant about community parking and entitled neighbors, but when they asked to see the community parking area she was talking about, she had to admit it was actually my private property. They said her whole attitude about the situation was a red flag that made them wonder what other neighborhood conflicts she might be involved in. That family ended up not making an offer, and neither did several others. Patricia's house sat on the market for almost 3 months, which is unusual for our neighborhood. Houses here typically sell within a few weeks. During this time, I noticed Patricia getting more and more frustrated. She started parking even further away from my property, like she was afraid of getting too close to my garden. She also began taking a different route to her front door that involved walking the long way around her own house rather than passing by my landscaping. The really satisfying part came when I learned why her house wasn't selling. My next-door neighbor on the other side mentioned that she'd been talking to some of the potential buyers who'd looked at Patricia's place. Apparently, word had gotten around among local realtors that Patricia was difficult to deal with and had ongoing neighbor conflicts. In a tight-knit community like ours, that kind of reputation travels fast. One buyer even told my neighbor that Patricia's own behavior during the showing had convinced them she wasn't someone they wanted to live near. When someone spends half an hour complaining about their neighbor's beautiful garden, it says more about them than about the garden. Patricia finally accepted an offer in late fall, but it was for significantly less than her asking price. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd had to drop the price twice and that the buyers had used her neighbor disputes as justification for a lower offer. The best part was moving day. I happened to be working in my garden when the moving truck arrived, and I got to watch Patricia direct the movers while pointedly avoiding looking in my direction. At one point, one of the movers asked her about the beautiful landscaping next door and whether the neighborhood had a gardening club. She just muttered something about difficult neighbors and changed the subject. As the moving truck was pulling away, Patricia took one last look at my garden. I was watering my plants with a regular hose at the time, not the motion-activated sprinklers, but she still kept a careful distance from my property line. She didn't say goodbye or anything, just got in her car and drove off. The new neighbors who bought her house are absolutely wonderful. They're a young couple with 2 small kids who are thrilled to have a landscape designer living next door. They've already hired me to help them plan some improvements to their backyard, and their kids love watching the motion-activated sprinklers in action. They think it's the coolest thing ever. The husband told me that during their home inspection, they'd specifically asked about neighborhood issues and drainage. When the inspector saw my garden and sprinkler system, he actually complimented the professional installation and said it was exactly the kind of thoughtful landscaping that prevented erosion and water runoff problems. It turns out my solution to Patricia's parking problem had created benefits I hadn't even considered. The boulders and plant roots help with drainage during heavy rains. The native plants provide food for local wildlife, and the whole setup has actually improved the soil quality in that area of my yard. 6 months after Patricia moved away, my property value has increased significantly. The county assessor came by for a routine evaluation and noted that my landscaping improvements were a major asset. My homeowner's insurance company even gave me a small discount because the improved landscaping reduced the risk of foundation damage from poor drainage. I still get a kick out of the sprinklers going off whenever delivery drivers or solicitors cut across my property line. Most people laugh when they realize what happened and apologize for trespassing. The UPS driver now knows to walk around the garden and he always waves when he sees me working outside. The motion sensors have caught a few other interesting things over the months. I've gotten footage of deer families coming to eat the berries from my barberry bushes, raccoons playing in the sprinkler spray during hot summer nights, and even a family of foxes that has started denning somewhere nearby. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that Patricia actually did me a huge favor. If she hadn't forced me to take action about the parking situation, I never would have created such a beautiful garden or discovered how much I enjoyed landscape design as a business. Her entitlement led directly to several positive changes in my life that I'm still benefiting from. The best revenge really is living well, and my garden has given me a constant reminder of that truth. Every morning when I sit on my new stone bench with my coffee surrounded by thriving plants and the sound of water from the fountain I added last month, I'm grateful for the whole experience. Sometimes I wonder if Patricia learned anything from what happened, but honestly, I don't think about her much anymore. I'm too busy enjoying my beautiful car-free garden and planning new additions for next spring. The lesson I took away is that when someone tries to take advantage of you, the best response isn't anger or revenge. It's making your own situation so much better that their opinion stops mattering entirely. And if anyone else in the neighborhood ever gets ideas about using my property for their convenience, well, the sprinklers are still active and the barberry bushes have gotten even thicker over the winter. My little insurance policy against entitlement is stronger than ever. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Mobile phones became common in my country around 2004, just as I finished high school. My parents bought me my first phone, a second-hand Nokia. It was bulky and basic, but I promised myself that someday I'd buy a new phone with my own money. When college started, I had a 2-hour daily commute. In high school, I had excelled academically and won several district-level awards. These awards were being distributed during my first year of college. One nationalized bank award finally gave me enough money for a new phone. I bought a Sony Ericsson K300Y and a premium SIM card, not realizing it had been abandoned by its previous owner. By the third day, I started receiving calls for a guy named Bitsa from various financial institutions. It turned out the number previously belonged to him, and for 20 years I've been getting these calls. Determined to keep my premium number, I began a routine of blocking wrong numbers. Back then, blocking was device-specific, so each time I got a new phone, I had to start over, keeping a list of numbers to block. I got my first job after graduating in 2009. Around 2010, I was assigned to a new project with a notorious reputation for burning people out due to a nefarious project manager named Bits. I didn't know his full name for quite a while. He took pride in making our lives a living hell. Bits ruled with an iron fist. From the moment his team stepped into the office, they were met with a barrage of emails and messages, each more urgent than the last. Bits thrived on creating chaos, often changing project deadlines on a whim, demanding his team work late into the night and through weekends. Bits' presence loomed over every task. He insisted on micromanaging every detail, yet was quick to take credit for any successes, no matter how small. Failures, however, were met with his notorious tirades, publicly berating his team and assigning blame without hesitation. His unpredictable temper kept everyone on edge, afraid to make the slightest mistake. Meetings were another tool in his arsenal of torment. He scheduled them during lunch breaks and after hours, ensuring no one could escape his grasp. These meetings were often pointless, serving only to reinforce his dominance and disrupt any semblance of work-life balance his team might have had. His relentless stream of emails continued around the clock, each carrying a thinly veiled threat, perfection or dismissal. Under his reign, morale plummeted and burnout soared, yet Bits remained oblivious, satisfied only by his complete and total control. I was quite ashamed when I learned that he was from the same area as I was and had gone to the same school, though years before me. In 2012, our company merged with a parent company. Almost nothing changed personnel-wise, but infrastructure-wise, we got MS Outlook and an organization view. That was when I first learned about Bits from an organizational hierarchy perspective. His full name was an eye-opener. It was Bitsa. Now, the name was common enough, but at the time, mobile numbers had an area-specific pattern, so I already knew that the previous owner of my number was from the same area as me. Still, it could be someone else. I wanted to dig deeper. I talked with an old mentor who lived in the same area and had coached several high school students for the last 2 decades. He confirmed my suspicions. I won't go into the details, but it was evident that Bitsa and Bits were the same person. I had been quite pissed with this unknown person named Bitsa for almost a decade by then, and Bits had been the bane of my, and several others' existence for quite some time. This is where the revenge lies. First, I unblocked all the numbers in my phone. I was getting 5, 6 calls daily on average, but after unblocking about 150 numbers, it increased to 15, 18. My answering strategy changed drastically. Instead of saying wrong number, I politely explained that the owner had changed his number and provided his current number to update their database. This is where I could be the a-hole. I also volunteered his manager's number, in case he tries something else. The fallout was epic. These people had been trying to find him for almost a decade. Banks had sold his debts to companies that harass people for a living to get their money back. It turned out he had been taking loans in everyone's names, his wife, parents, uncles, aunts, and giving everyone that same number. He was evading credit card debt and loans of upwards of $200,000, equivalent in USD, but it's a shitload of money where we are from. Apparently he had almost 20 cases filed against him, but no one could find him. Probably why he thought he could walk on water. There are multiple versions of what happened at the office when his manager started to get calls about him. He was let go about 2 months later, haven't heard from him since. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Most of my stories of malicious compliance seem to come from 3 jobs. This is another from when I was working in IT at the college. It had been decided the world would be a better place if 2 of our campuses were merged into one. They were only a mile apart and the new site was 3 miles away, so there wasn't a big location issue. Sure, some people had a harder commute, but some got an easier commute. It's kind of equitable when you think about it. To make the new build a rousing success, there would be consultations, and people would be consulted, and everyone would be listened to. Yeah, you know that didn't happen without me telling you, don't you? Each department was to send a representative to the new build consultation group. Despite my best efforts to stay quiet or even absent every time the subject of a mandatory volunteer came up, I got voluntold to go. I, in all my mid-level position glory, was to represent IT. Fine. I really didn't want to take part in a farce of a consultation, so all the mistakes could be labeled as unforeseeable. But if you're going to send a professional fault finder to a consultation, I hope you have a full load of ink in that pen. The meeting comprised 5 people from different departments and Susan, who worked in facilities, so had been given the job of managing the new builds. No one seemed to think there was a significant difference between booking rooms for training courses, making sure coffee and lunch breaks were catered, and making a multi-million-pound building come into existence and transfer hundreds of staff and thousands of students over to it. After introductions, top of the agenda was parking. To be fair, I think it was smart to start with the contentious issue. Parking was already a problem, and the rumor was there would be less parking at the new site. This would be solved, apparently, by not having any student parking, ignoring the inconvenience this would cause, and questions over the public transport suitability. There was already not enough staff parking, so how was screwing over another group help us? After a bit of vague details about somehow rewarding car sharing, we were furnished with the magnus opus of technology that would solve all our issues. A gate with number plate recognition. This would stop all those pesky outsiders coming over here and stealing all our spots. Something that had never been an issue. I'd been quiet until this point as I thought it all a bit daft, and I was formulating a plan out of the job anyway, so these issues were unlikely to affect me much. But now we had hit on some technology, I felt the need to chime in. I let the others ask their questions to understand how a number plate recognition gate works. For those not aware, it's a barrier with a camera. When you pull up, it reads the number plate on the front of your car. All cars have a very standardized white front number plate in the UK. Translates that picture to letters and numbers, looks it up in a database, and if it finds a match, it opens the barrier. Once everyone understood the technology, I opened up with the problems in their happy path only thinking. OP. So Jan and I points thumb at unsuspecting woman sat next to me. Car share every day and she drives. But today her car is broken, so we take mine. What happens when we get to the gate? Susan. What do you mean? OP. My number plate won't be in the system, so what happens? Susan. Well, it could be, even if you don't drive normally. OP. That assumes a level of preparation. What if it's an emergency? Susan. There will be a call button. You can speak to someone to get let in. I ignored the likelihood of that call system being managed, instead focusing on the loophole she'd just opened. OP. So I'll just be let into this carefully controlled car park with limited spaces based on my say-so. Susan. OP. And you said I could have my number plate in the system. Susan. Yes. Please to not be talking about the space issue again. OP. Which one? Susan. Which what? OP. Which number plate? I have 2 inches, Susan. You do? OP. Yes. Susan. Why? OP. Because it's illegal to use the same number plate on different vehicles. Susan. Oh, right. OP. So can the system cope with more than one number plate? Susan. I'll check on that. While she took a note about the multiple vehicle issue, I reloaded. OP. Great. What if my other vehicle is a motorbike? Susan. I don't think that will be a problem. OP. Yes, but I'm guessing the camera is on the gate and looking at the front. Susan. Yes. OP. Motorbikes don't have front number plates. How will it read it and let me in? Susan. I'll check. She then wrote another note and brought the meeting to an end, citing time. A few weeks later, I heard from someone that there had been another new build consultation group meeting. I hadn't been invited. Mission accomplished. Post note, the first winter at the new campus, 6 months after I'd left, I heard from ex-colleagues that the incline to the car park gate was so steep that when the first hint of ice turned up, nobody could get up to and stop at the gate long enough for it to open before they started sliding back down into anyone following them. Anyway, thank you for watching.